my perspective is actually that the foundation of building healthy food is actually that we value healthy food. And from that, then we can come up with the practices, the tools, those things to work with nature on the soil, the plants, the animals to make that better food product.
So, welcome to At the Helm, the podcast series where we explore how food can be one of the most powerful tools in preventing and treating chronic disease. I'm your host, Dr. Charles Helm. I'm a family doctor and a paleontologist. I am broadcasting from Tumbler Ridge in northern British Columbia in the Rocky Mountains. I'm fascinated by the intersection of human health, evolutionary biology, and I know that when it comes to health, the kitchen and the farm are just as important as the clinic. And today we are going to explore that farming side of things. And we are heading to the heart of Alberta in Western Canada, about 25 kilometers north of the city of Red Deer. And we're going to meet a truly remarkable farmer who has been rethinking everything we thought we knew about beef, soil, human health, etc. So Craig Cameron is the owner and the operator of Peony Farm, which is a regenerative cattle farm near Lacombe, and he raises Piedmontese cattle using the principles of regenerative agriculture. And I'm going to read you the Peony Farm tagline because it says it all. It says, "Precision crafted regenerative beef optimized for nutrition." So we're going to hear all about Craig's journey to become a regenerative farmer whose top priority is optimizing his beef for human health. We'll also learn how he didn't start off in regenerative farming. In fact, he earned a BSc in environmental chemistry, and he worked in the world of conventional agriculture for a while. We'll also learn how his daughter's specialized nutritional needs spurred Craig's research to provide the best possible food to support her health. And in addition to that, we're going to delve into the perhaps controversial issues regarding beef, health, and climate change, and how regenerative agriculture practices may actually present an optimistic solution to these sometimes fractious debates. Craig, I'm so grateful to have you with us on the podcast. Welcome to At the Helm. It's wonderful to have you here.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Wonderful. So, Craig, can we start off if you just tell me briefly your history in farming and agriculture, the last decade or so, taking us up to the moment when you realized that your daughter's health needs were pretty much going to reshape your entire career?
Yeah, so I grew up on a farm from the time I was just a little guy. I was learning all of the skills that come with being a farmer, and as I grew older and started to I went to university, learned about environmental issues, and started getting into looking at what are the different types of farming out there. Then we moved and joined my in-laws' farm, and we were doing just conventional agriculture. And from there, we thought we were doing a pretty good job. We had the Piedmontese cattle, and we were producing a really good, tasty, enjoyable meat product. And that all changed, or my perspective of that all changed when my first daughter was born. Pregnancy and everything was really good, no issues. But when she was born, she ended up in delivery getting an anoxic brain injury. And so we spent the first month of her life sitting in the NICU, wondering what this was gonna do to us. And bringing her home, suddenly we didn't have doctors and nurses to care for her. Suddenly we were the ones responsible for her health and her well-being. And so we did a lot of like looking online at different things, seeing other parents' experiences with disabilities. And it was amazing how many of the kids had other health issues that didn't seem to really be related to whether it was their brain injury or their other disabilities. And then also seeing other parents that were saying when they changed the food that they were feeding these kids, it changed a lot of these health outcomes. And so that's where we realized that, okay, if we're going to give her the best life possible, we really have to look at this food issue. And like I said, I thought our beef was pretty good, but my wife was convinced that we needed to get grass finished beef for our daughter. And so she ended up going and buying beef from another rancher. And that was kind of a big kick in the pants for me, I guess, because I wanted to be the one taking care of my daughter by providing her with the best food. Um, and at the same time, I was a little bit skeptical of the grass finished beef thing. Um, so I really started digging into the research of, well, is grass finished actually better? What is actually making it better? And how can we produce the best for her on our own operation? And that's when I got into learning about regenerative agriculture and realizing that not all beef is equal in nutrition. Not all grass finished beef is even equal in nutrition. And that the best for our daughter was going to be grass finished beef on a variety of plant species, which I now call forage finished. And so we decided to do that for our daughter and do it for our customers as well. Because if it's not good enough for our daughter, then why would we be feeding that to our customers? And
That,
so,
that that is amazing. It sounds therefore as if this experience with your daughter really was the catalyst and the thing that pushed you to do this research and ultimately to do what you are doing now. It's a remarkable story. It really is. But just in case there are any of our listeners who are not familiar with the term regenerative agriculture, can just in a couple of sentences, can you just tell us what it's about?
yeah, so regenerative agriculture for me, there's a lot of definitions floating around out there, but for me, it's really about taking a holistic approach to growing food. And there are six principles of regenerative agriculture. And the most important one for me is what's called understanding the context. And that's really about there's no one size approach fits all. Every field's different, different animals are different. And so we really have to tailor an individualized approach for optimizing the health of the soil, plants, and animals. And so that's definitely for us the most important part of regenerative agriculture.
Right. So can you just then take me through what are some of your key practices on Peony Farm for you to be able to say, I'm doing regenerative agriculture?
Yeah. So um, as far as specific practices, the most important piece we've seen as far as nutrition is growing a wide variety of plant species. We've found it's really hard to separate soil health and plant health. They're so interconnected, and having a variety of plant species really feeds multiple biological communities in the soil, as well as provides positive interactions and sharing of nutrients between plants. It's really helps with some of the other regenerative agriculture principles are like having a living root in the soil year round. So the more different plant species we have, some of them will last longer into the fall, start earlier in the spring. It also provides ground cover, which is another regenerative principle by just having plants that are always growing, covering the soil there. So that principle really covers a lot of the other aspects of the principle, or that practice really covers a lot of the other outcomes of the principles. And then being a livestock operation makes it super easy to do that because we have cows that'll eat all of those plants. And so yeah, it's all those pieces together. As far as like nutrition in the soil, we really focus on traditional agronomy tries to drive growth with a nitrogen system. And we found that talking with researchers, playing with some experimental stuff on our own farm, that the nitrogen really can limit a lot of the other nutrients that the plant can take up and pass on into the beef and stuff. So we've really driven our nutrition of the soil and plants from calcium, which will draw up quite a few other nutrients and add to the mineral nutrition of the plants and animals.
Right. And so the remarkable thing is that putting all these things into practice, you're now in a position where you are feeding your daughter what you consider to be the optimal diet, and you're feeding her through a G tube, a gastrostomy tube, as far as I understand.
Yes, yeah, that's correct. And so, um, just basically based because of her really healthy diet, and she's also on two anti-epileptic meds, but that's the only med she's on, and she's just doing incredibly well and very healthy. So it's very awesome.
So happy to hear that. That's fantastic. Can you just Piedmontese, the word, some people might not be familiar with that breed. Is there a reason why you've chosen to farm with Piedmontese cattle as opposed to any other breed?
Yeah, so the Piedmontese breed has a unique tenderness gene that's really easy to track. And so Peter was in that breed even before we did the regenerative thing, but it's really paired really well with what we're doing now because that tenderness gene means that we have an incredibly tender and tasty product even though it's grass finished, where sometimes people can have a hard time keeping the tenderness and that in a grass finished product. So it really improves the eating experience. It also has allowed us to not age our beef. So a lot of beef will be aged to try and improve that tenderness factor. It can come with the downsides of losing some of the more volatile vitamins out of the meat, as well as increasing histamines, which some people have a sensitivity to. And so, because of that tenderness gene, we're able to not age the beef and kind of limit those issues that can come from that. So,
Right. So that actually takes me to my next question, which is how does your beef differ nutritionally from conventional beef? There must be differences, I think you're referring to.
mhm. Yeah, so when we first were making the transition, we got to be a part of the Bionutrient Food Association's beef study. And because we were in transition, we had meat samples from our grain finished product that we were doing before and samples from the beginnings of our process of this forage finished regenerative thing. And the two biggest things, one of the biggest things was the omega fatty acid ratio. So omega 3s going from our grain finished to our forge finished was 3.5 times higher. We went from an 11.66 to 1 ratio to a 3.86 to 1 ratio. And from what I've read in the research, the ideal omega ratio for human diets is somewhere between a 1 to 1 and a 4 to 1 ratio. And so that was pretty that was one of the big ones that like was like, oh, this is actually going on the right track because we saw that big of a jump just from switching that first little bit. And now we're seeing this year our omega ratio in our feed. So we measure the omega ratio in the feed and then in the meat. So we haven't tested the meat this year yet, but the feed was at a 1.2 to 1 ratio, which is like pretty incredible just based on the plants we were growing and how we were growing them. And then the other major nutritional factor we saw in that first testing comparison was a 24% higher level of iron, which was another just something we
Mm.
weren't expecting.
Right. No, I love talking about omega-3 because, as you can possibly note, I'm South African from my accent. I grew up in South Africa, and the evidence really is strong that our ancestors, our human ancestors, began in Southern Africa and moved out and colonized the rest of the world from Southern Africa, from South Africa, and there's good evidence that the catalyst for that change was when we began eating seafood and on a regular basis. And that the theory is that those omega-3 fatty acids in the seafood gave us that extra brain power, which then gave us the ability to move and to want to move and to go all around the world. So omega-3 is a big deal.
Yeah.
And it's a big, big deal. And it's got incredible benefits for us. And they sometimes are forgotten. And much of our regular diet these days just no, it's not good enough. And so it's really interesting to hear you talk about that, and that's one of the advantages of the beef that you are producing. But just to get back to the soil, I'm intrigued just to know how, because it's not just about the quality of the beef and the plants, but it's about the quality of the soil, as I understand it, that leads to better plants, which leads to better beef, which leads to better human health. It all seems to come back to the soil. So can you just clarify for me how important the soil is?
Yeah, so the soil is incredibly critical. Um, and again, like that relationship between the plants and the soil, it's really hard to separate the soil health from the plant health. One of the big things we're learning about as a regenerative agriculture community is all of the little microbes and biological communities that are in the soil and how they contribute to our nutrition and health. And so they'll have an impact on finding nutrition for the plants, as well as producing some of their own compounds and stuff that the plants will utilize. And some of the most interesting research over the last couple of years, I think, is on what's called the rhizophagy cycle. And that's basically they're finding that the plants will produce what are called root exudates. That's like some sugars, amino acids, different like compounds that they're producing. They'll release them as root exudates to feed the microbes and attract them to the roots. Then they'll actually consume the microbes. They'll enclose the microbes in their roots, strip all the nutrients out of the microbes, strip off the cell wall, and then release the microbes back out into the soil to go do it all again and bring them more nutrition. And they're basically saying these plants are farming these microbes to get their nutrition. And
Mhm.
one of the really interesting pieces that they were showing when they're doing this research is if they don't have any microbes doing that process, the little root hairs that are really important for gathering nutrition from the plant won't actually grow. They actually require those microbes being pushed out to grow the root hairs, and it's super fascinating.
Well, I must tell you, this is stuff of which I know very little, but it's absolutely fascinating. I think you've alluded to this already with you. You mentioned the word testing, but I'm just interested to know, how much you depend on feedback. So it's wonderful to have these good ideas and you've done your research and you think you're doing everything right, but I'd imagine you need some form of confirmation through some testing or tracking that yes, what we are doing is bringing us closer to where we want to get to. Am I correct?
Yes. Yeah. So, like a lot of people will say that the soil is the foundation of healthy food. And my perspective is actually that the foundation of building healthy food is actually that we value healthy food. And from that, then we can come up with the practices, the tools, those things to work with nature on the soil, the plants, the animals to make that better food product. And the other part of that as well is that we have to recognize that people are a part of the food system. It's not something over here that is separate from us. We're a part of it. The system is really dynamic. It changes a lot. We can't just say this worked yesterday, so it's going to work today. And the last piece is that it has feedback loops. So yes, we can monitor and see what's going on in our system and make better decisions about going forward how we can produce this. So we use both our senses as well as laboratory testing to look at different pieces of our food system. As far as laboratory testing goes, we do soil testing, We do what's called sap testing. So that's measuring the nutrient levels in the plant sap. We do um, feed testing. So what actually is the total nutritional value of the plants that the animal is eating. We do live liver biopsies on our animals to just see, okay, they ate this nutrition. Is that equating to good nutrition in their bodies? That also will tell us, like when we first got into doing the liver testing, it told us we had a bit of an inflammation problem from our feeding practices before. And so it can tell us things like that as well in the animals. We do a little bit of product testing. It's pretty expensive, so we don't do it all the time, but every once in a while we like to make sure that all these different pieces are equating into a final product. We have customers that have kind of developed into our taste testing crew that will analyze and be like, oh yeah, this is good. This something tastes a little off with this or whatever, and we can tweak things that way. As far as like visually on the farm, sometimes a laboratory test will tell you something and you look and you're like, ah, it doesn't look quite right. And then we can look at what might have maybe been wrong with the test or what was wrong with the sampling procedure that went to the test. And so that visual, smell, all those pieces are really important to from our experience to make sure that our laboratory tests are accurate too. Just because we have a lot of experience, like that animal looks not like it should. Why does this other piece? So it takes both to make sure that we've got a healthy system.
Yeah, so you've really got multiple ways that complement each other of giving yourselves feedback, is what I'm hearing. Yeah,
Yeah.
which is great. I should also just mention that you are quite a prolific writer. There are all these newsletters and websites and blogs. We can maybe put some of them in the show notes for this podcast, but you certainly seem to be keen on getting the word out there as to what you're doing and to basically educate people because there's a lot of misinformation out there, and that actually takes me. I want to try and cover the topic of the environment and ethics and so on. And so there are two really widespread beliefs which one comes across a lot regarding beef. And number one, beef is bad for the planet. And number two, beef is bad for our health. And that's sort of what one hears quite a bit. So I'd love to hear just how you respond to both of those, not accusations, but comments. Yeah.
Yeah. So um, coming from an environmental background in my education, we had to learn a lot of the science and stuff behind climate change, learn about carbon and how it acts in the atmosphere, how it affects climate change. And so it's been really interesting seeing now in regenerative agriculture how things like growing a plant for as much of the year as possible is capturing that much more carbon than a plant that's growing for like an annual plant like wheat, for example, which only grows for, say, a certain number of months, and then the rest of the year it's just brown. Like there's nothing else growing there. That doesn't capture near as much carbon as a mixed forage crop, which has plants at different stages of development, green plants, some that are reaching the end of their life cycle. It takes it takes much more carbon out of the air to build those plants, to feed the microbes in the soil. The other part is it's not just carbon dioxide. There's also like the concerns around methane, which is a more intense greenhouse gas. And some of those concerns they're finding in a system where the animals are grazing on pasture that that methane that's produced, there are what are called methanotrophic bacteria in the soil that can break down that methane fairly quickly and can produce a net negative carbon situation. And so we see from our perspective now, looking at it from using cattle versus not using cattle, that we can capture way more of that carbon than if we were doing just annual crops, for example. Um, as far as the ethics of it, um, it's been really interesting to see how it doesn't matter whether it's a vegetable system or fruit system or anything like that versus a cattle system. There's still something is being dying, something is being consumed in order for that process of producing that product to take place. And so it really is for me about making sure that no matter which system we're using, whether it's producing plants, whether it's producing animals, that in both cases we're treating the plants and animals that we're working with respect, and we're giving them the best existence possible. And then recognizing that, yes, it does take the sacrifice of this plant, of the animals that are associated with the plant in order for me to also live. So it's it's a tricky, I won't say there's easy answers with it, but there's a lot more nuance than maybe we hear in a lot of the discussions. One other piece that's been really interesting lately is seeing more and more research coming out about um, the small water cycle as being really important for climate change as well, and how the destruction of the water cycle might be having a bigger impact on climate change than carbon even. And so there's people like Alpha Low and the Climate Water Project that are bringing a lot of this research out for people to see. And animal agriculture on that side has a huge advantage for improving the water cycle because we can leave wetlands, we can leave trees, a bunch of these things that are being drained or cleared for putting in crops. We can work around them with livestock, and like we could keep our beavers. We have beavers on our land that are block water and hold water on the landscape. And so we can leave these things that are having a positive impact on the water cycle and on climate change that way that we wouldn't be able to do if we were trying to maximize our cropland.
Right. And so to summarize everything you're saying, it's a phrase which I've come across, but I think it's appropriate here, and that people say it's not the cow, it's the how.
Mhm,
I mean, that's basically what you're saying. It's not the fact that you're raising cattle, it's how you're doing it. And
mhm,
that's what's critical, I think. And speaking now, speaking as a paleontologist, the one problem I have with the term the paleo diet is that it creates the impression that there was one single diet that all our ancestors were eating, and that was it. Whereas, in fact, our ancestors were very adaptive and versatile. They were extremely good at eating whatever was available to them, and that differed from one part of the planet to the next. So there's no one paleo diet. There are many, many, many paleo diets. But that does tell me that so many of those diets did include meat. And so we really, I mean, we are adapted to eat meat and we're very good at digesting meat. And so I'd like to know how those sort of comments strike you as a beef farmer.
Yeah, like we have a lot of customers that are doing like the carnivore thing right now. Everything from that to customers that are vegan except for our meat, they say, because they only want meat of a certain quality, otherwise they don't want meat. So it's really interesting, and I find seeing all these people with different diets, finding what's working for them, and seeing some of the research out there about how individualized our diets need to be to optimize our nutrition. That yeah, I think beef is a key part of the diets, but I definitely think there's a wide range. And one of the things that I forgot to mention when we were talking nutrients, but is really interesting is beef pull will will take phytochemicals from the plants. So plants produce phytochemicals for a number of different factor things, and it'll store it in its meat. And so we can actually get a lot of plant nutrition in our beef um, because of what the beef is eating. So lots of those phytochemicals will be antioxidant or anti-inflammatory. We have some customers, one that I just talked to a couple weeks ago that we delivered beef, and they're like, "You're the only beef we can eat without getting terrible joint pain." And so I think a lot of that is connected to those phytochemicals.
So to paraphrase, I mean, I think you're actually saying that raising beef and raising cattle can actually help address climate change, not because people are going to think, no, it's contributing to climate change, but you're actually saying, no, from your perspective, it can help to address it in a positive way. I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah, there's so many different ways to produce beef that we go everywhere from a significant environmental problem to a significant environmental solution. And there's everything in between. So uh, we definitely see where we're at with our production as being a part of the solution and not a part of the problem. And a lot
Yeah.
of our customers feel the same way. So
Yeah. And just by the way, I really like it's a nice notion to me of someone who's vegetarian and says they've got all these problems with meat, but they come to you for your meat
yeah.
and they're willing to eat that. I mean, I think that's a very powerful notion actually, because there's a lot that someone like myself will have in common with those vegetarians when they start talking about the traditional way of raising beef and eating meat. So there's a lot in common there. But um,
I'm a beef farmer and I have a lot in common with them too.
right, exactly, yeah. So if I could, again, I just want to sort of be a devil's advocate and take the position of some of your critics. And what are they going to say about you? They say, well, very good, Craig, you're doing all this stuff. But I mean, it's pretty idealistic and it's pretty small scale. It's good for you, but it doesn't really matter in the bigger scheme of things. And so I guess they're saying it's really, they don't think it's possible to scale this up so it becomes more general. But would you agree with that, or how would you address those criticisms? I mean, it's great you're supplying your clientele right now, but wouldn't it be lovely if everybody was farming the way you are farming? Is that possible? How would we get from where it is today, where there are just a few people like yourself, to it becoming a broad-based movement?
Yeah, I definitely think it's possible. Um, like we're doing it with like we have 250 mama cows is where we're at. We're on 2,200 acres. So like we're not big, but we're not small either. The biggest thing is just changing mindset. That's the biggest thing and it's the hardest thing because we've been told for so long that there's a right and a wrong way to farm and we haven't taken into account this nuance and this constantly changing, shifting thing that's the natural system. And so as we start to change our mindset and learn about how all these different pieces can fit together, we have been able to like we've cut out pretty much all of our fertilizer and we just do some micronutrients and a little bit of like calcium and stuff for our nutrition side of things. But we've been able to cut out all our nitrogen fertilizer, and that is a huge piece for a lot of these guys. And we're not the only ones. We've got friends in this community that are doing the same thing on a cropland, on all sorts of different things. And it's just changing the mindset. We can reduce all these inputs and make better food. We don't even have to go to the same lengths as me for all the extra testing and the nutrition factors. We could cut out a lot of these things and get people on the right track fairly simply. And so the biggest thing is just what's happening between the years and what we're willing to change and what we're willing to do. So
Right. So another way of phrasing that, of putting the same thing, is if there was a young farmer or some young farmers who they know about this. They want to transition to regenerative agriculture. They don't quite know where to start, where to begin. What would you say to them?
For us, the thing that helped us the most to be confident in what we were doing was to add the SAP testing in, because that was the first testing we could do to just see, okay, we don't actually need this much nitrogen. We can cut nitrogen without doing anything else. We could cut that out. So just a little bit of testing, a little bit of, I'm happy to answer people's questions if they get a hold of me. I'm happy to say what our start was, what all we're doing for our operation. I'm really excited about the possibilities of it, and so I'm happy to share with young farmers, old farmers, any farmers that are interested in this, how to start thinking about it and making the change. But I think that first piece of just a little bit of testing, just to give you confidence. You don't have to change anything to your practices to start. Just do a little testing and be like, I don't actually need to do what I've been told that I need to do. So that piece was really critical for us, and I think as well for others.
Right. And I think I was watching one of your videos or one of the websites. It might have been your father-in-law who was being interviewed. I'm not sure. I can't remember. But th this gentleman said that he farmed in a certain way. This is why I think it's your father-in-law. And then along comes Craig, and you wanting to do things differently. And he could see that your new ways are improvements on the old ways. But then he said something along the lines of, but they're actually very similar to the very old ways. So it's you're using the best of science and the best research available to do things in a certain way, but in effect, to move forwards, which is what you're trying to do, you've actually got to go a long way back, not back to the last 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, but way back to, I mean, I guess to me, the example is like, what did the bison eat? They didn't just eat a single type of grass. They ate probably a variety, So it seems to me that you're going way back, but you're doing it in a scientific fashion. Am I accurate in that, or is that fair enough?
Yeah, yeah. So like I find that there's a going back to see what was happening. And so we see what that was. The part that we're playing with is, so I saw in one book I read is called Soil, Grass, and Cancer by Andre Voisin, and he had some pictures from a study they did in India of different people and different rabbits eating foods from different soils, and how the physiology of the people and the rabbits just from the different soil locations was different, and then how they then did some like nutrient applications to the soil of, I can't remember exactly the nutrients it was, but it wasn't nitrogen. It was more of like of these microbes and that type of thing, and how then the rabbits physiology improved from that. So there's both the, we see what these things we're doing, and then we can work with the natural system because we know the places where these people had the best health impacts had certain soil characteristics. We can try and bring that into other places with our nutrition program. And so that's why we kind of use the term precision crafted, because it's partially a craft, but it's also the like adding in this other kind of more technical piece.
Right. So what I'd like to emphasize or just get back to is that you're doing all this amazing work, but it started for you for a very personal reason. So I just like to know, bringing it back to the personal, how it's a whole journey you've been on, obviously, but how has this journey changed you as a father, as a farmer, as a citizen of the world? How has it changed you? It must have changed you.
Yeah, it's so hard to pinpoint what exactly's changed. Everything changes so much. Um, and I think the biggest thing for me that it's done is it's helped me to see all the positives and the possibilities of change, and to be able to look for where I can make a positive difference. It's not that I have to keep doing things the same way. I can change the way I farm so that I could spend more time with my family. I could change the way I farm to make more nutritious food. I can change the way I interact with my wife to have a more positive relationship. I do a lot of like coaching and like going and getting coaching and some like going and getting counseling, some of those things, because I realize that working through this whole process, we can get to a better place. And so I think that's been the biggest change for me is just realizing that that's possible and being able to keep stepping into that.
That is really, really inspiring. So, what do you hope for the future of food and the future of farming in Canada?
Yeah, I would love to see more people getting on the regenerative thing. Um, the other piece that I really think is important, and I don't know how that's going to turn out, is to be able to find ways to give the farmer a good income for making a better product, as well as to be able to create accessibility for people that can't afford what we're producing. And that's really tricky, a really tricky thing because when we were first starting to price our products, we were wanting to keep them as low as possible to try and get more people, but we realized like the people that really need this the most wouldn't even be able to afford it at store prices. And so that's been something that is close to my heart, and I don't know where that's going, but I know there are places like in the States that have started to do like healthy food prescriptions and getting insurance and stuff to cover stuff that way. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to get this in the hands of people that need it the most at some point and somehow, but I don't know how that's going to happen.
We've got a long way to go, don't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they're good ideas, but it just shows how we're still at a pretty basic point in this whole thing. I got a question for you. If you could spend a day on your farm with health professionals or policymakers, uh, one day with you, what would you want them to leave? How would you have changed their ways of thinking? What would you want them to leave with?
Yeah, I think the biggest things we do farm tours through the summer. And one of the biggest things that people have come away from those farm tours with, I think, is just seeing how all the different pieces work together and how farming and the way that we do these practices make such an impact on the final quality of the product that that it's not beef is not beef and wheat is not wheat and all these foods aren't all the same and that the farming practices really have a big impact on the products that people are recommending to their customers or recommending to their clients, recommending to their customers that there's a lot of different pieces that go into making that the right product for
Hmm.
the customer.
Yeah, and so that's the amazing thing to me is that you really are all your thinking, all the things you're telling me, it's all starting with the soil and the plants and the beef, and it's all geared ultimately towards human health. And I guess that started with your daughter.
Yeah.
But that is really what's inspiring. So I got to tell you, this is not this sort of stuff I learned in medical school. It's you go to the store, you buy something.
Yeah.
And then we talk about the protein and the fat and the carbohydrate content and all the micronutrients. You learn all about those things. But I guess I grew up thinking beef is beef
Mhm.
and wheat is wheat. And so I really want to thank you you've certainly opened my eyes. It's just a whole sphere of knowledge that I really had no opening to before. So I'm very grateful to you, Craig, for sharing that with me. I'd just like to ask you what's next for you. You must have goals. You sound like a goal-orientated person. So where is this leading for you?
Yeah, so I'm super passionate about trying new things and continuing with our testing. And so we have about, I think, three different research projects for this summer, just different things, tweaking, trying to see how that's going to affect the nutritional value of the beef going forward. And then we're really working on our marketing and trying to get our products into more people's hands. And those are kind of the two big things for me now. In the next year is trying to keep making the product better and getting it into people's hands so that they can experience the benefits. So
Yeah. So it's really more of the same, but the operative word is change. You're always reanalyzing, seeing what you can do better, but you're obviously on a course which you're very comfortable with, and you just want to make it as good of a course as you possibly can. So, Craig, I just want to, in finishing, I just want to bring this back to your daughter and just a few thoughts that occurred to me. Because you've let us know that she's got epilepsy and got seizures, and so she's on anti-epileptic medications. But what you're feeding her through the G tube, I mean, there's obviously a lot of meat product and beef product in there. So I'm just wondering, knowing that the ketogenic diet was initially introduced just about a century ago for the treatment of resistant cases of epilepsy, of seizures. And so, whether you've seen any benefit in her seizure control, just for example, I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
yeah, so the neurologist that we're followed for our daughter, she is involved in the ketogenic diet program at the Stollery. And so we do use the ketogenic diet at times followed with the team at the Stollery for our daughter in helping to control her seizures. It's not an all the time thing. It's kind of a when we see that we might possibly get some benefit from it, we'll put her on it and we'll see improvement and then she'll kind of plateau and then we'll know it's time to stop the diet for then and maybe look at doing it again at another point where we might see some more benefits. We've never seen her come regress after dropping off the keto, but we definitely see a benefit going on the keto with her seizure control. And she still has some medications for seizure control as well, but we do see a benefit from the keto diet.
Right. And I'm sure that even if she is on fewer other medications or decreased dosages, that's a victory.
Hmm. Yep.
It doesn't have to be all or nothing. So she might still need to be on some, but if she can be on less, that's fantastic. Yeah. That's really interesting. So I think yeah, today's podcast is actually the last in this season of podcasts. But Craig, it's a wonderful way for us to transition to the next season because we're going to be focusing there. We're going to be broadening the scope. The first season has really been focusing on remission of type 2 diabetes, but we will be broadening it to other benefits of a food first approach, including mental health benefits and ketogenic diets and epilepsy, things like that, but especially the mental health. That it's a very important thing for me personally, and it's a huge thing for our society because we're facing such increases in problems with mental health, and so many of them, it seems to me, would benefit from a food first approach
Yeah.
and people at least considering dietary change as a way of treating it. So I think speaking with you, it's remarkable and it's just fortuitous that it's the last one in this series, but it's a sort of a segue into what we'll be doing in the next series. So once again, I thank you so much for being with us, Craig.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.